I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of Australia and their connections to land, sea, sky, and community. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and I extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples listening today.
Hello, my love, and welcome to the April and Fritz podcast. My name is Brie, and I'm a floral designer based here in Melbourne, Australia. Today, I have the privilege of speaking with Rita, who is the founder of the Sustainable Floristry Network, also known as the SFN. Rita is a second-generation florist, she's a science writer, and the founder of the No Floral Foam Movement. So we're very, very lucky to have her here today. The SFN was born out of, Rita's frustration with a whole system that has really kind of lost connection with its roots in celebrating nature and beauty and seasonality. And I'm really, really excited to hear more about that system and kind of her thoughts about that today. I personally believe that one of the biggest misconceptions of the floral industry is that it is sustainable. After all, flowers are nature, so it does make sense. How could it not be? So I've really been looking forward to this conversation and hearing Rita's perspective on sustainability in the industry. So we'll spend this time talking about what sustainability means in the floral industry and how you as a consumer can play an active role to help move the needle towards a more sustainable future. I am a Sustainable Floristry Network member florist, and what that means is that I have taken the Foundation in Sustainable Floristry course as created by the SFN. And as part of that, not only do you have to complete the course, but you also have to take a pledge that you're going to do your best to support sustainable practices. So we are a sustainable floristry studio here at April and Fritz, which means that, we do support the environmental, social, and economic requirements of present and future generations. And how that kind of shows up for us is that we do not use single-use plastics wherever possible. We have a strict no floral foam policy, and we really don't use imported flowers unless absolutely necessary to reduce our overall carbon footprint. And look, that's a path that I decided I wanted to take my business in when I started in the floral industry, because I was really quite surprised, to be honest, at how complex it was. You have imported flowers, you have glass houses, you have floral foam, and just so much more that goes into one single arrangement. And so, as you'll hear, we're really diving into the question of, is there such a thing as a sustainable florist? And I'd really love to hear your thoughts on this after the episode. So please go ahead and leave us a rating or review to let us know. We do look at each and every review. So I'd really, really love to hear your thoughts. So again, thank you so much for being here and spending this time with me. I am, as always, forever grateful to you for listening, and let's get stuck into it. Welcome, Rita. Welcome so much to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you here. I have been eagerly awaiting this conversation for quite some time. I feel like I am very, very lucky to have you here because you are quite a limited resource. You are only one person, but you do a lot. And so to snag some time off of you, I feel very, very fortunate. So a huge welcome to the podcast. And can I just get you maybe to start by introducing yourself, sharing a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Brie. My name's Rita, and I am currently, for the past 5 years, I've been setting up and running the Sustainable Floristry Network, along with a terrific and ever-growing team. And before that, I've been in flowers all my life, basically. I'm second-generation florist, grew up around my parents' businesses, selling flowers on the side of the road. That was my first job. We had multiple shops, hotels, corporates, and then my more recent business was running a wedding and events business in the Yarra Valley, just outside of Melbourne. So very long family history there. And through that time, I studied at uni, and I did a science degree and majoring in botany, and then later did postgraduate studies in science journalism. So very much the SFN was about, like, getting to that point in your life where you kind of like bring it all together and kind of make use of your skills. So yeah, it's been a pretty wild time so far.
I love it. I love it, honestly. And we first met, I was a student at Melbourne Polytech, and you came and did a talk. And honestly, like, I think that was probably one of my favorite moments out of the entire course. And it wasn't even like necessarily part of the course, but, talking about, where you've come from, your background, your passion, and how you kind of ended up here was so inspiring. So maybe you can share a little bit about what kind of prompted you to get into this, Sustainable Floristry Network role, and how that all kind of came about.
Yeah, sure. Well, it started, I guess, I've always been very conscious of waste in the industry. Maybe a decade ago, I started seeing a lot more imported flowers coming into Australia. Obviously, they were coming on, aeroplanes from Holland and France, and obviously that's a big distance. So I started thinking about, what's involved there. But really, the SFN has come out of the No Floral Foam movement. So I started the account No Floral Foam in 2017. I guess, there was a bit involved before that, but I was running my business without foam at that point. And it was like, there's a lot more to the foam than just this. And I sort of got into the whole communication side of things and saw what you could do with social media if you shared people's ideas. And I was very much, I was probably a little bit bored at that point with the work I was doing. So it was like, it really kind of got me thinking again. And then, like the rest of it just sort of, fell into place, what's happened since then. So it's just a natural, but yeah, it's very much out of that and realizing, what the big problems are. And then I had to really go and get my head around concepts about what is sustainability. That's a big piece. So yeah.
Amazing. And maybe just to kind of take it back a step, can you maybe explain what floral foam is for anybody who doesn't know what that may be?
Sure. Yes.
I personally don't use it, so I couldn't even describe it if I tried, but you might have a better idea.
Sure thing. So floral foam is that green block of foam used for flower arranging. You can wet it. It's amazing. It absorbs heaps of water, and you stick flowers in it and they stay there. And I think everyone's got memories of like sticking their fingers in it, and it's got that texturally kind of fascinating thing because it really is the only product like that. There's no other. It's a particular type of plastic. It's the only application for this particular type of plastic in a foam. So that started. It was sort of an accidental invention. So it was a byproduct from another industry, and they literally thought, oh, let's see if it holds flowers in place, and played with the chemistry a bit and got it to absorb the water, and off it goes, and you've got this incredible commercial product. And what the invention of that product did was enable everybody to be able to, it gave everybody access to flower arranging. Suddenly they want to put something and they want it to stay, and it stayed there. So it opened up a whole new market to all these sort of people at home. And that's where I think a lot of the early advertising of this product was directed at. But then, of course, it made its way into industry. And now you've just done the training package through the Australian training package, and that there are designs that you do into that product. It's set part of the curriculum to do a certain design. You must use this product. There are other approaches, but actually it's compulsory to use it for all these units. So that's how big an influence this product has had in modern floral design. Like, it really is. And it's so convenient and it's so useful, but it's plastic and it crumbles into countless pieces of plastic which get mixed up with the flowers. They get washed into the sink. And as far as plastics go, it's about as bad as plastics get because of how easily it can make its way into the natural environment, funerals or down the sink and all those sorts of things. So yeah, it's a particularly, like, when we're looking at tackling the plastic crisis, this is the sort of plastic that we need to address first, like microbeads in cosmetics, another, microplastic, instant microplastic, and used with water. So yeah, similar sort of thing.
Great. And with the floral foam, we obviously talk about the fact that it's so easily kind of spread into the waterways and everything like that. But I think what we talk about when we talk about sustainable floristry is not just floral foam. So can you maybe kind of define what sustainable floristry means beyond floral foam?
Yeah, sure. So I guess that's something that we are looking at. We're part of our job at the SFN is to try and work out what this means, because we're effectively taking one discipline, of academic discipline, which is sustainability, and floristry, which is this industry, and bringing them together and saying, okay, what might these two words put together mean? And that's a moving target, because we're still, every week we discover something new and go, okay, shouldn't be doing this, or this is better, or that's not as bad as we thought it was. And so it's changing, and that's dependent on scientific discoveries and what we know about, growing flowers, or, manufacturing of materials, or what, peak organisations are doing with their sort of, ideas about sustainability and where we need to head. So what we do is, with this sort of idea, is that we go and look at what does the UN say? What's their definition for sustainable development? And what do these sort of leading thinkers and academics have to say? And then we apply those ideas to floristry. So it's sort of just taking scientific understanding and applying it where it fits. So we have a working definition, but that changes, and that is basically, to engage in floristry, or work as a florist, or design in such a way that not only sort of considers our needs as a business right now, but what sorts of impacts is it having long term? What sort of world are we leaving people? Are we leaving waste behind? Are we adding to the climate crisis? What sorts of industry, when it comes to supply chains, are we ensuring that everybody in that supply chain is earning a living wage? So lots and lots of things come into that. And then when it comes to practicing sustainable floristry, it's about moving towards these targets. So it's a long
amazing. No, that's a great definition. No, I think that's perfect, because I think it just goes to show that it is such a multifaceted kind of concept. Like, it's not just, okay, if you don't use foam or you just do this one thing, then hurrah, you're sustainable. It's not just that. It's constantly evolving. It's so many different factors that it's almost a little bit overwhelming sometimes, to be honest, because it's like, what even is sustainable? But at the same time, I feel like if we kind of go back to what you said first, which was around the UN kind of direction of what sustainability means, that's kind of the guiding principle, right? Like, if we all kind of move towards that, then that's kind of the gist of it, right? That's sustainable in a way.
Yeah. And look, people will say, oh, like, there's lots of different definitions, and they argue it. But really, what we're trying to do is work towards some sort of equilibrium or balance where these different three pillars of sustainability, sometimes people, planet, profit equity, economics, and environment's another one, where you've just got these three, you're constantly trying to find a balance that works. And yeah, it's looking at that, and people will, say, oh, I don't believe that, agree that definition. I think we've all got the same kind of like goal in the end. So yeah.
No, 100%. And why, and maybe this is a silly question, I don't know, because I think in this day and age, we do talk about sustainability much more than what we probably ever have. But why is it that sustainability matters in floristry, like not just in all industries, but floristry in particular?
Because all industries, not just forestry, all industries need to tackle this issue and sustainability issues. So it's not just floristry, it's all industries, and with urgency. So what we're facing at the moment is this sort of, it's sometimes referred to as polycrises, where you've got climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, those sorts of things. And every industry has a responsibility to understand what the problem is and change in response to that, because we can see that often legislation is very slow to change, policy is very change, and we need to initiate that, because actually the way the world works is the corporations, the industries have the power. So as business people, we actually do have quite a lot of power to drive change. And so that's why looking at from the perspective of perhaps not as an individual, but as an industry and, bigger, broader changes that we can make, it is actually really, really quite significant, because it can actually have quite a big impact. As, an education organisation, we really want people to grasp, like in our course, we don't just sort of teach. We're not teaching people how to arrange flowers. We're teaching people about what sustainability is, because we need it to be applied not only in the workplace, but in, people's personal lives and family lives as well. So I would say it's all industries have to do it, but I guess we decided that, like looking at this from the perspective of floristry was really, really important, and using science and as our guide is the best way to sort of approach it. So.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's kind of this triangle in, the course that says like people, planet, and profit, like you kind of mentioned earlier. And the funny thing is that, we say like, oh, it's the corporations or it's this or it's that, but actually all three are very dependent on one another. Like we need to nourish the earth. The earth provides so much of what we consume, so that therefore is business. And, we rely on money from business to survive. Like, so it is a massive ecosystem. And so it can't be done in isolation.
No, it can't be done in isolation, but we have to kind of understand that, behind all these environmental problems, the biggest driver is human consumption. So it's overconsumption of natural resources. And that's not even across populations. We've got, we talk about the 1%, and you'll start probably hearing a little bit more about that kind of 1%, because 1% of the world's population is actually responsible for over, around half of emissions. So there's a lot of concentrated wealth, because we're talking about, looking at the way we have to start, considering what do we need as humans for a happy life? Do we need all this extra stuff? Because all this extra stuff is having a pretty negative impact on the earth. I don't know a lot of florists in that category. In fact, I don't know any florists in that category, but those florists are certainly working for people in that sort of category. So you're seeing a lot of really big events, a lot of flowers in some of these, I saw a wedding last week where obviously the budget was enormous, I would say millions. And so that's where we as florists start to have an impact. Also, of course, on the day-to-day sales, everything adds up. But that's where the connection is. And that's where we can start to really kind of guide choices and shape the direction that we head, from now on.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, it's so interesting, because I'm sure that there are a lot of people listening who are consumers and clients and customers of, their local florist. And, they're kind of thinking, what do you mean overconsumption? What has that got to do with floristry? I just want to get some flowers for my wedding, or I just want to, whatever, send that bouquet. So it is something to kind of wrap your head around. But when you think about it at scale, when you think about that 1% that you're talking about, it is the extravagance, I suppose. And that really comes down to, I guess, our perceptions as society as about beauty. What does it mean to have an extravagant life? Like in this wedding, we were talking about just a moment ago, how many flowers got imported to that wedding to be able to make it look so beautiful. And don't get me wrong, I think, we're obviously in the floral industry because we love beauty and we love nature and we love all those things. So it's obviously, like you said, going back to finding an equilibrium amongst all of those things where we're kind of not taking more than what we should be.
Yeah, and look, we're very pro floristry and flowers because, when you look at how big cities function and this problem that we have with, this disconnection from nature, increasingly people are disconnected from nature, and we know what the therapeutic benefits are, from going outside and going into nature and connecting, and the mental health benefits and all that sort of thing. We are wired as human beings we are part of nature. So the further we get away from it, the more problems that we've got. And so we see floristry actually as being a way of helping with that connection. Like here's this opportunity for us as humans, and especially like we're very much pro flowers and enjoying flowers because there is that opportunity for really valuable connection. But that representation of nature must be authentic at the same time. So if you've got a box and it's just like a couple of out of season flowers surrounded by heaps of plastic and ribbon and all that sort of, is that a representation of flowers and floristry? Are you going to get the kick that you're hoping for? Like there's the foliage, for instance. You get something from it. It's alive. People have house plants for a reason. And the same idea, I think, applies to floristry and flowers. So there is definitely a place for flowers and an industry, a healthy industry, absolutely. It gives us meaning as humans. It's got cultural relevance, makes people happy. It's about finding how to do it in the way that's going to have, not leave a negative impact.
Yeah,
that's a lot of words.
Definitely. It's a perfect amount of words because I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head. It's not a matter of all or nothing. I think it's just about kind of finding the sweet spot in between and being conscious of being loyal to nature as much as we possibly can, without kind of the abundance of other stuff that can kind of come along with it,
Yeah.
Perfect. And so why, I guess, as a consumer, as somebody who's maybe listening to this, like, why should they care? Like if they get their bouquet and they're happy, like if they've got their wedding and it looks beautiful, like why should they care?
I think flower lovers out there might be quite surprised about, the process that goes into producing flowers and transporting them and packaging and everything. And, I certainly here in Australia, I can go to a supermarket and see some arrangements, or any shop, not just a supermarket, and I'll see a mixed bouquet. And I know, because I've worked in the industry, I know that flowers come from Vietnam, and I know that one's come from Kenya, and that one's come from Ecuador, and I know which ones are grown locally. And I think that customers perhaps, if new florists don't know that process, or if people don't know where their flowers come from or what goes into growing, they're just sort of like a flower, but behind them is actually quite a big story, often with a lot of energy put into it, and potentially quite a bit of waste as well. And so if you're a consumer and you're wanting to make a purchase with a minimal impact, you really need to know about what it is you're buying. And your florist needs to know too. And that's something that hasn't really been, it's not part of an education system. It's something that you learn when you're working on the job, who grows what or what flowers are coming in, and seasonality is something. But consumers, absolutely, they can inadvertently just make a purchase by just going, I'll take that from the appearances. That can potentially carry quite a heavy carbon footprint, particularly if those flowers are coming, air freighted into Australia. So yeah, it's something that conscientious consumers would be quite surprised, and it's something that not necessarily florists are aware of too.
Yeah, and look, I can definitely vouch for that because, when I kind of started down this path after my corporate job, I used to just, go to my local supermarket, my local market, wherever it was, whatever it was, and I'd be like, oh, gee, they're pretty. Yeah, I'll get those. And that's the average consumer. And so I think the thing is that, again, we just kind of assume there's a flower in front of me. It must have been, grown down the road by some beautiful flower farmer, but that's not necessarily the case. There is a whole operation behind just even the bouquet that you see in front of you at your local. And for me anyway, it was very much a bit of a wake-up call as to the kind of lack of sustainability or lack of consciousness, I suppose, around the sustainability of flowers once I was in the industry. And so, a really big part of what I try to do with my clients anyway is, help educate them about seasonality and understanding that, at certain times of year, certain things won't be available and that kind of thing. Because ultimately, I think my goal as a business owner and as somebody who wants to, be conscious on this front is, it's my duty to kind of help educate my clients on that. And I think a big part of why they come to me is because, they want to go down that path. But again, it's not like there's some kind of Australian made symbol on, flowers, right? So it can be really tricky to know.
It can. And as you know, there's always a different choice. There's always something. You can always find something. But what we've kind of, come to view as a good flower arrangement or a good bunch of flowers, and it sort of might be bright or it might have some feature flowers, it's that aesthetic perhaps that we need to challenge and understand that that's not always sustainable. But it doesn't mean you can't have anything. Like at the moment, you can see some camellia flowers and foliage. Now, that's just what happens to be in flower in my garden at the moment. And putting them in the house, I still get joy out of it. And there's the sense and the presence of something having been picked and it being natural. So there's always something, even in the worst seasons. It's just that it might not be as flashy as things are in spring or summer. It's just that we have to accept that at certain times of the year, it's like vegetables, you narrow down to your brassicas and your root vegetables in winter, whereas get to summer and it's like, the vegetable garden goes crazy. So it's just a part of it, I think, is accepting that from an aesthetic point of view, you're not always going to get the big, blousy, floral look. And you have to just understand that winter is a quieter time. And then if you want to get married and you love roses, well, make sure you get married in the week that roses are in season, it's...
Yeah. Yeah. And two things. I think one, I was actually recently watching a show called The Bear. I'm not sure if you've seen it or not, but it's season 3 and they basically are talking about going to the market every day to get fruit and vegetables because he's a chef. And there's this line in it and it's what grows together goes together. And I loved that so much because I was like, the same can be applied to nature. Like when you almost have something that isn't in season and you put it with things that are in season, it looks odd. It doesn't feel quite right. And you only know that when you see something that is put together, that is all in season and should be put together. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, I've said this, plenty of times, but, it's like you can go to the supermarket and you can the way that the supply chains work now, we can have a feast every night. We can have a Christmas dinner or some sort of huge, impressive meal every single night. That's not necessarily a good thing because of the strain that it puts on systems and production systems. And so, the same applies to flowers too. To get those flowers out of season, to get them, that means you've got to create these growing environments that mimics the out of, how they would be flowering. So that means heat for, say, roses, or it means importing them. And starting to see that as not such a beautiful thing. Like, it's not, because of the energy and the emissions. They can be huge. I mean, there's an example we've got on our website of a wedding where I used roses out of season. This is, over a decade ago or whatever. And I worked out that an entire year's carbon footprint for one person was used just in the roses. So in terms of emissions. So
that blows my mind. Honestly.
Yeah.
It blows my mind, like, when you say it like that, because I was literally only at the market this morning and I was looking at the roses and I was like, oh yeah, like, I know they're out of season. These ones haven't been imported. These are Australian made. But you're right, they have been grown in a hothouse, and it's kind of like you almost have to go through this mental process of like elimination, what's the worst of the worst, and then how do we move closer to it being less emissions, and what does that look like? And, I was looking at this flower just thinking like, oh, that's so beautiful, but there's this whole scenario behind it, and you're just saying even one wedding, there's enough carbon emissions for 1 year.
Yeah. But in the same way, we do have a lot of very passionate and conscientious growers here. And so I know, I was visiting a rose farm just a month or two ago, and, these committed to like working towards renewables, and, it's a process, that process where I think it's really important to understand that we are in a period of transition with so many things, with energy, we've got to look at shifting over to renewables, and that transitional period is reflected, and that means confusion, honestly, because it's like, oh, am I doing the right thing? Is this better? And we don't always have the answers too, which is a bit frustrating. And obviously, First of all, florists have got to understand what are better decisions, and they've got to, and then that information has to get through to consumers as well. So it is a process, and also to understand that, say, for instance, a decade, we've been working in a model where we're looking at maximum yields and efficient growing and all that sort of thing. And there is a lot of really promising, amazing technology and understanding about growing and production that's coming through. And we, both florists, but also growers, they do it because they love flowers. Like they're horticulturalists. And so everybody wants to do the right thing. It's just that, unfortunately, the way we've been doing things, as with driving petrol-driven cars and all the rest of it, is a problem, and we have to change. It's a process.
Yeah, no, and you're so right. And like you said, even when I was just standing there looking at these roses this morning, I had driven my petrol-driven car. I don't have a hybrid car. I don't have an electric car. And, even if you just looked at that alone, it's like, oh, well, you must be unsustainable. And so I guess it begs the question then, what does it mean to be a floral designer or a florist who is sustainable at this stage? What does that kind of mean?
Well, I think I don't know if there is such a thing as a sustainable florist. Like we certainly don't use, I think very early on when we were trying to understand what it might mean, we used the expression perhaps sustainable florist, and then it stopped. And the reason is because really it suggests that we've found that balance point, that equilibrium, or whatever it is. Whereas to be honest, after 5 years of researching this and speaking to experts all over the world, and we're still identifying that. So I would say that there's no such thing as a sustainable florist at this point, because you would have to get everything right. You'd have to produce no waste. You'd have to be carbon neutral. And I'm not talking about offsets. I'm talking about, you can't buy your way out of that type in that sense. The offsets have a place, but we've got to stop producing carbon dioxide from fossil fuel sources, right? So you'd have to ensure that everybody in all the supply chains that you work with, the papers, the materials, that everybody was receiving a living wage and was working in safe and fair conditions. I don't know anybody who can just tick every single box. You can get pretty close probably, and some people are doing an amazing job. But I think I tend to think of a sustainable florist as sort of having reached that kind of perfect state, and I don't think we're there yet.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
and I think it kind of goes back to that transition period that you were talking about,
Yeah.
right? Where we recognize there's a problem, we're trying to figure out the solutions, and maybe we don't have the solutions for everything right now. And I think it just kind of goes back to, if I'm looking at 2 alternatives, 3 alternatives, and, one's, less emissions than another, I think in my mind, what makes a sustainable florist in this moment is somebody who looks at those 3 options and says, okay, well, I'm going to choose the one that has the least impact. And,
Absolutely.
It's all about driving towards those practices that, are going to make a difference in the long run, even if it hasn't maybe quite been perfected yet.
That's right. And look, the target, like I said earlier, the target changes all the time. One of the things I've spent the last few weeks looking very closely at is the issue of moss in floristry in Australia. And
This
basically, yeah, it is. And basically, the situation is there's no sustainable use. There's no such thing as sustainably harvested moss in Australia, or particularly sphagnum moss, that is. It's all picked from wild populations. We have the rate of regrowth is slower than the rate of removal, and they're carbon stores. Then you get to other mosses that are not sphagnum moss, and they're all taken from wild populations. And every time we pick up a piece of moss and use it in an arrangement and dump it somewhere else, we've got a little package of soil and animals and fungus and all these different species. And there's, issues, phytosanitary issues with moving these products around. So at multiple levels, there are problems. And that's like, my head's just going, oh my goodness, after writing this, I've just written this for Flowers magazine. So, for the message has been, let's use moss instead of floral foam. Well, unfortunately, that's not necessarily a great idea either. It takes us back to using, different manufactured and more sustainable products that are made from, say, agricultural byproducts rather than wild harvested populations of a very, very scarce resource like sphagnum moss. So,
Yeah. No, and the thing is, like, when you mentioned that to me before we jumped on this call, I was really taken aback, because I was like, what do you mean there's no moss now? Like, what are we going to do? But I think that's the thing, is that, like you said, this is a moving target. So the best thing we can do as floral designers is just try to stay in the know and just kind of continuously educate ourselves so we are on top of that. And so I guess then, moving past the florist, what kind of role or responsibility does a consumer have to help move the needle? If you've got a florist who is doing their best and, they're trying to make as many good choices as they possibly can, and then you've got a consumer, what kind of role or responsibility do they have?
Look, I think it's about, like, with anything, you go and you buy a pair of, jeans or something like that. And a lot of people do homework on the brands. They've got some idea. If they don't want to be involved in, fast fashion, for instance, then they avoid those brands, or they avoid buying too many pieces of clothes, or they look to buying secondhand or something like that. So it's about taking that kind of attitude to your flower buying too. Obviously, you're not going to buy secondhand flowers, but you're certainly going to be asking questions about the products. Imagine your flowers are your products, and imagine the waste perhaps of when you give this gift wrapped. What's the recipient going to do with it? And ask those questions of your florist. Say to you, I want minimal wrapping, simple wrapping. What's in season? Seasonality and local too. Local being local and seasonal. Local means it's less transport generally, fresher. And seasonal means you're less likely to have lots of inputs in the growing process, such as heating or, trying to create these sorts of artificial growing conditions. So, yeah, the consumer asking questions and seeking that simple question, asking their florist, like, what's in season locally, and just can I have some really simple wrapping for that? And getting flowers, you think about it, they love just a vase of water. Take them home and put them in a vase of water. Forget a lot of the extra trimmings wherever possible, because think about waste at the end of it. I guess they're my two bits. I mean, look, I have to say most flowers are sold as cut bunches. The vast majority in shops or so that's that's something that's a real positive. But things like funerals, that's another huge area, because like I'm part of a working group looking at issue of funerals, and cemeteries do end up with a huge amount of waste. And just because it's you leave the cemetery, the waste stays, and you're sort of thinking about what might be left behind, who needs to manage these sorts of products, I guess, at the end. So, yeah, there's a lot the consumer can do.
Yeah, and it's funny because again, not to put it back on the florist, but I actually had a client recently who their mother was like a real, loved nature, loved their garden more than the inside of their house. And it was their funeral. And basically, we went and got all local, seasonal flowers and, really, really beautiful. And I was a guest at this funeral, and essentially at the end, we actually ended up taking the casket spray, and we just made little, bouquets for everybody to take home. And it's like that kind of waste that could have been waste is now actually enjoyed a second time. And then, I encourage people to pop it into their compost or, in their green bin, and, it's wrapped up in recyclable paper. And so it's, I think, just thinking outside the box a little bit around like you as a consumer, because you don't just get to enjoy the flowers once, you get to enjoy them twice, and on and on and on it goes. So I think the responsibility of a consumer is to kind of challenge their status quo, because a lot of people in that instance would have been like, yep, cool, flowers are done, leave them at the cemetery or wherever, never think of it again. And so I think in this particular instance, we were really, really fortunate because, this person obviously loved nature and we wanted to honor that. But yeah, it's like it is possible, I think, is the thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to think of flowers and cut flowers in the same way, there's a slow flowers movement. And to think of that follows on from the slow food movement. So it's the same principles apply in terms of growing and seasonality and, slowing down almost in that cooking process and that enjoyment process. And the simplification of flowers, because we got pretty complicated and fancy there for a while, I'm just thinking visually of the time, like just a few years ago, when it was like phalaenopsis, anthuriums, reflex roses, all of them spray painted, dyed, It's like, how much more manipulated can flowers be? Slow flowers is a pushes away from that, I guess.
I guess the last kind of question that I have then, Rita, is fundamentally, do you believe that you have to sacrifice aesthetic or, looks for more sustainable options? Because I think that, as consumers, people get worried that, if I have to be sustainable, then I have to just have sticks or something. And I don't believe that's true, but just kind of as a final question, do you think that that is something that exists?
Do we need to sacrifice aesthetics? I think we need to alter our expectations about change our expectations of what beautiful is or what good is, especially what good floristry is. Because if something's coming and it's got a really high carbon footprint, or if it results in a whole heap of waste that is potentially quite polluting, and a lot of resources are used, well, then that's not a good thing. So that doesn't become good floristry. The other thing is, if it's missing the mark with making that connection between people and nature, that's not such a great thing either. And what we're seeing is we're seeing a lot of really creative florists come through who are using materials in incredibly creative ways, using foliage, for instance, when flowers aren't in season, celebrating foliage in like incredible ways, and these mixed bunches, and it can last so much better and bring so much freshness and stuff to a room. So it's not necessarily about sticks, but it is about taking the emphasis off perfection and this idea that we can have these kind of like everything all the time. It's just about changing our expectations, not necessarily less, but changing them. So.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. I think that, there is something beautiful about looking outside and seeing the leaves change, like that. And we love it as people. And so then looking inside and seeing all spring or summer blooms, it just doesn't match and it just doesn't make sense. And so I think you can still get that really beautiful aesthetic that you're trying to achieve, but without the additional cost of the planet or the people or whoever it is that's helping you get there. Yeah. So ultimately, I land on the fact that, I don't think we need to sacrifice anything to have really beautiful blooms all year round. Like you said, I think it's just about changing our perception and knowing that, for example, if a flower doesn't have one petal, it's still really, really beautiful. So thank you so much for being here. I so appreciate you jumping on this call. Like I said, it's been a long time coming, and I'm so grateful for your insight, and I cannot wait to see what the SFN do next. I'm a massive advocate, so I'll be watching, and I can't wait.
Oh, thanks, Bree. Thank you very much for having me on too. And thank you for doing our course too. I know you were one of the first people to complete it, so we're really super grateful to for all our students, because it's that's what keeps us going.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I'll leave a link in the show notes for anybody who is interested in the course. I would say that you don't necessarily have to be a florist. If you are interested in kind of the business of floristry, if you're interested in any kind of facet of botany, I think it's a really interesting thing to go and have a look at. Although it is aimed towards florists, I think there's a lot to learn. So I'll leave a link in the show notes, as well as a link to the SFN network as well. And you can check out all the resources there. Thank you, Rita. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Rita.